Hello everyone, and this is Urmi. Welcome back to my channel where I talk about finance, career, self-investing, and public speaking. Today we have a very special guest, and we'll be talking about mental health in the South Asian community. But before we start with our interview, I want to make sure, I want to ask everyone to like and subscribe and to leave a comment. So that will help a lot my channel and help me to create also more content. Today we have a very special guest. So I would like to ask our guest, her name is Rima, to present herself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Towrima. Thanks for having me, Urmi. It's a pleasure to be here on your channel, and it's my first time ever sharing my experience, and I'm glad that we're talking about mental health. It's a topic that I'm really passionate about. So just to give a brief about myself, Towrima, I'm Bengali Italian, just like Urmi, but I moved in the UK just over 12 years ago. For better education opportunities, future prospects. I'm currently working in the media agency, and here I am talking about, sharing my experience about mental health in the South Asian community.
Well, thank you. We're very happy to have you here. So I want to start asking you, what was your experience growing up in a South Asian household, and was mental health, was it ever a topic discussed in your household?
That's a great question. I think mental health isn't really talked about in any, as far as I know, in my household, we barely talked about mental health. It wasn't really talked about, and I didn't know myself either much about mental health just until 2 years ago, when I was diagnosed with, severe anxiety and mild depression. So, we've always labeled ourselves with mental health as in like people that are extremely suffering from diseases like schizophrenia, bipolar disorders. We don't really label like mild symptoms like, anxiety or any other stuff to be called as mental health. So I think my story only starts about 3 years ago when I was traveling. I had family overseas who came, in the UK from America. We were traveling, like in about 2 weeks, we were traveling in 5 different countries. And it was a very stressful and exciting journey at the same time. And, I started having some chest pains. And I thought that was, caused through to, some heavy lift luggages. And so I started considering going to the GP. I checked myself. The GP was telling me that maybe it's something to do with, your muscle tension, or because you've got some deficiency. So we got some blood tests done. And then the story carried on where I was like going back and forth to the GP, checking myself and explaining myself every single time the same story that, my chest pain wasn't going away, until like maybe there was a point maybe a year ago during the pandemic where I went to my friend's place, and she noticed that I was feeling different than I was normally. Like I couldn't sleep. Like my sleep was continuously interrupted every 2 hours. And then she was like, "Are you sure you're okay? Maybe you should check yourself with with some professional help, maybe consider going to self-therapy." And she knew about it because she had family in her household who went through similar situation, and therefore she was able to guide me. And, that's how the next day, immediately, I self-refer myself to, mental health counseling therapies, right? And it's been a year, and it's been like a great change, a big transformation in myself. And that's how I've been open about mental health, I'd say.
Did you talk about this to your, parents? Because I guess you actually, when this happened, you approached for the first time your friend, and she luckily was able to guide you because she understood, what was happening. And luckily you did the right thing of taking care of yourself. And after that, I'm assuming this was the first time that this has impacted you. Did you have a chance to have a conversation about this with your parents or everyone that is close to you, just to, start this conversation about mental health and how important and serious it is?
I think it was a very difficult conversation because, growing up, even our parents themselves, like, they didn't really know much about mental health. And so it was difficult for me to kind of share my problems. And I'd say that for some time, I kept it to myself because I couldn't believe to myself as well that I signed up to something that I wasn't taught much about it. I didn't really know what I was going into until now, when I realized that, everyone should get access to mental health. Everyone should get access to talking therapies, because I feel like in our South Asian communities, mental health is almost like a taboo. It's a topic that is not really talked about, and we label mental health with, as I mentioned earlier, like schizophrenia, or people that are really psychopath, or have gone through like domestic violence, abuse, that sort of thing. So I'd say I kept it to myself for quite some time, until like I thought this was the moment, the right opportunity for me to share my experience, and for them to also learn what mental health was. So probably, perhaps they could also invest themselves in seeking help, because it's not something that a few people go through. Like, a lot of people, like, I think everyone go through mental health problems. It's just that it's not talked about enough. And on our everyday basis, like the little stress that we go through, that's mental health. But there's not enough awareness out there, which goes to show like, we really need help from people, that sort of thing. But yeah.
And did you get at least some positive feedback? Do you feel like now you get a bit more support from, the people in your household, like your parents? Are they able to understand you better? Because like you mentioned, I think everyone in life, they go through some mental health issues. Like, I also have issues with anxiety, and a bit like you, I couldn't believe it that I was feeling that way, and it just started a few years ago. And I think it's always important that you take that first step, that you go and check yourself. And I also think there is nothing wrong on seeking help, or just going to therapy, which is also very important. And I think a lot of people in our community, they really neglect that, like, you're just going to speak to a stranger, how can they help you? And in a sense, I agree with them, because sometimes when you go and speak to a stranger who is not, did not grow up with the same mentality, it might be really hard for them to understand you. And I agree with that. But I think if you find the right person, the right professional therapist who can help you, he or she will be able to guide you better.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the same reason with myself. Like, when I enrolled myself to talking therapies, I carried some sort of shame and less compassion for myself for investing myself in something that I needed for myself, right? To heal, this healing process that I needed, which, a lot of people couldn't familiarize themselves with because they didn't have knowledge about it. And this thing, I feel like in many of the South Asian communities, we think these little things that we go through, they're just like a momentary situation, which, at some point we're gonna go over it, this situation, and it's just there for a temporary moment. But we don't really, I feel like this is also a problem where, the relationship that we have, like the relationship that children that have with their parents is less open than I'd say we see in many other Western cultures where, you know, they actually sit down and they talked about many different personal issues. But I see that in our communities, there's some sort of hesitation in terms of like the way we need to approach our parents or they need to approach our parents. And I feel like it's, yes, we are good at blaming others, at telling them, yes, it's because of their way of approaching that we are in this situation. But I feel like talking with my therapist, I just started realizing that we also need to place ourselves in their shoes and realize that the way that they have they carried their life so far, like, you know, they immigrated from Bangladesh to Italy, so they didn't really have the chance to think about their mental health because, you know, their life was always on the where they had to worry about preparing what's on their plate. They didn't have the time to check in themselves, right? So only now I feel like people have started opening up with this topic about mental health. Do you have any sort of experience where, you know, it's actually talked about within your community over there in Canada?
It's the same in Canada too. No one actually speaks about it. Like in general, no one speaks about it. Like it doesn't matter like from which community you are from. Now, luckily, there are more people like trying to bring more awareness. But I do agree with you that in the South Asian community, this is not speaking enough. And even in Canada, it's the same story. And I think you bring very good points when you mention that, you know, it's a little bit different for the South Asian community because we don't have that type of open relationship with our own parents where we can actually speak freely about everything, because often in time you might get judged by your own parents. You know, when they say, what are you talking about? What is this mental health? You know, they think it's just you having a moment of sadness and you probably just go away and, you know, just go, I don't know, just take a rest and the next day you will feel better, and they just neglect everything. So I think that also plays in a sense into this whole thing. And also the fact that even for them, they never had a chance to check in with themselves and really understand. But that also comes from the fact that this is relatively a new topic that not even back in the days it was ever spoken.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And so you have spoken about traumas. So do you have anything that you can suggest on how we can overcome these traumas? Because I think yourself and myself, like we grew up with some traumas, right? Because we grew up in a different culture, which was a Western culture, and we always had to fit somehow a box. We were treated in a different way. We would never be able to understand, like, you know, how am I supposed to fulfill all this expectation that the society was imposing on us, you know? And I think that also creates some, you know, mental health issue. Like you get all this pressure to meet certain expectation in your, you know, work life, your personal life. And, you know, when you're studying, you know, you have to be a doctor, an engineer.
Yeah, definitely.
You have to get good grades, you have to get married, you have to have kids, which is a lot of pressure. And oftentimes our parents just want us to follow that path. So what are some ways to overcome these traumas that really we carried with ourselves for so long? Can you tell us something about it?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something I talk about a lot with my therapist, and it's we have so many high set of expectations from our parents, and it's this thing of competing with other people is kind of normalized, and it's all about boundary, how you set the boundary with the people around you. And I often talk about this with my therapist, and at first I wasn't really sure what she meant with boundary, because yes, I know literally what it means to set a boundary, but how can we actually set that without really, closing that space, that you have from other people. So, she talked about, the way that our parents would go on about, setting expectation, the same way we would go on about setting the boundaries by telling them, this is not the right moment to talk about this matter. I'm not ready to tackle this situation right now. I need some space. Or, for example, little things like, when now that everyone is working in a hybrid mode, right? Especially for us Asian communities, it's sometimes difficult because, when they see us at home, they think, yes, we also have the time to go on and do some home chores, right? But actually they don't realize that we are in the working mode, right? And so, my therapist was telling me sometimes like things like, you're closing the door, but that doesn't mean that they're gonna understand that you're actually working. You have to also remind them that, I'm closing the door. I'm currently working. I have a set of meetings, but at 5 o'clock, I'm free. So we can talk about anything that you wanted to come in and, share with me. So that kind of conversation needs to be set up. So the more you set it up, and the longer you can go by setting this kind of boundary, the sooner they will start realizing that, you have your own space, which needs to be respected, which needs to be accepted. I think it's just a process which needs to be set over time, and it won't happen overnight. It will take some time.
Yeah, and I think like setting boundaries is very hard in general, but I think in our own community it's even harder because everyone is into everyone's business. Like there is almost no privacy. Like let's be honest, everyone wants to know what everyone else is doing. And you did make a very good point about this, that now the fact that we're working from home and everyone is thinking we're chilling, but in reality is we are working from home, and it doesn't mean that we can do other things. Because I also get asked the same question from my mom, where she asked me, are you actually working now that you're home? Like, of course I am working, I'm not chilling. And she doesn't get it, and she asks me this question every time, as if like me not going to the office for her means that I'm not working.
Yeah, you're more flexible. I think there's also another good point that my therapist was mentioning. Imagine you have your main door open, your house main door, right? So if you keep it open, obviously people will come in and then they will step in into your present moment, right? But only if you close it or you tell those people that, that you are in a certain situation where, they can't, they can't step in, right? So it's all about like, how can you close that door without hurting their feeling and telling them, sometimes we think that we need to justify ourselves by explaining, by giving multiple reasons as to why we're doing this. But the reality is that you don't have to really justify yourself to those people. You just need to tell them that, you're currently busy, or you're not ready to talk about this matter right now in this present moment. And that's it. They won't have any chance to interfere, or to be intrusive or coming into your affairs.
Yeah, and I think it's also like setting boundaries. It also means saying no. And often in times,
exactly.
like I think we were brought up as we have to please everyone. And sometimes when you say no, they take it really in a negative way. They're almost offended by you saying no to them. But the reality is sometimes some of our goals and values are not aligned with everyone. And I think us as people, we should not feel bad about saying no, because we have our own priority. And I think those if they're not aligned with other people's priority, then you should not feel bad about saying no. And I think it's very hard in our community. Like it's for people to get a no, it's very, very hard. And I think with time, hopefully it will change. I'm hoping so. Yeah, good. You mentioned very good points. And I want
Thank
to ask
you.
you another question, because you live in London, which has a very big community of South Asian people. What was their response like when you go around and see other people in the same situation, like going through mental health? Like, what was the feedback from the community itself, since you are surrounded by so many people? Like, are they finally able to take this much more seriously, or is it still like not talked about? Or even from like among people of your own age, how is it?
Mhm.
How is this topic being tackled?
Yeah, that's actually a great point because I think the opinions and how people understand mental health is a bit mixed. There have been moments where I've gone to seminars, conferences, and I've met and heard stories of women talking about, mental health issues. And from those women's stories I've encountered, it seemed more like, mental health is only talked about, or people actually reach out for professional help when the situation are really severe, where, in their households they're going through, domestic violence, abuse, uh, conflicts between the parents, and therefore, the children are not able to stay focused on their studies or any other aspect in their life. So they start seeking out for help. And then there have been situations where, I've had friends that where their parents themselves, they've encountered mental health issues like severe depression, extreme anxiety. And therefore, because of their past experiences, they were able to establish better connections with their children and able to identify where the children were struggling in their life, and then consequently, advise for professional help. And then there's the other part of the community where I've seen where, is relatively a new topic, as you mentioned before. It's still not uh, heard much about it, but they are taking the initiative to, making more awareness of it. Through, it could be any conferences, within their communities conferences or within their faith conferences. I've seen like there's a little bit of progress compared to before, and I think that's thanks to the pandemic, where a lot of people, by staying at home, they realized that they weren't feeling the same person as they were before, or because they've heard other people stories where, they've gone through different situation, because of other people's losses, or especially people's lives that have been lost during the pandemic. For many people, that caused a lot of like severe depression, right? And they've heard like how people reached out for mental health support. I know my parents themselves, they have learned more about it. So yeah, but it's still something that needs to be talked enough for any parents to advise their children, because I feel like anxiety, depression, that's very common in us in our age, more than ever, because we're always on our phones, social media. We're always comparing our lives with other people's lives, or because of the things that we see on social media, and we start comparing, right? So yeah.
Yeah. And you know what? I think why is it also not talked enough? It's because often in times when you think about mental health, you don't see it because it's inside your mind.
Exactly.
It's inside you. But
Yeah.
what people don't understand, that it actually translates in your physical health, because you are lacking sleep, you don't have appetite, so you start losing weight. So people, I think that's why people are really not taking it seriously, especially in our community. But hopefully, like, I'm glad to see that people are actually making progress. And like you mentioned, like, I think during the pandemic it made it a little bit more worse, because we're always at home. There is not that separation from work and life. And I think also because we were isolated, that it made it even much more hard on ourselves.
Yeah, definitely. And I also see a lot of changes in myself that, you know, when you actually start investing yourself in coaching, you know, any sort of mentorship, coaching programs, or talking therapies, you start realizing that the traumas that you've encountered in your childhood, or just those simple childhood moments that you went through, they start all making sense to who you are right now, the life that you're living, and the relevance those moments have to your life that you're living in right now. So, and that's really impactful because you don't really realize how those moments shape the way you think right now in today's life. And why, because I feel like little things like, born and raised in Italy, we were few immigrants in our classrooms, right? And we always felt uncomfortable about showing our identity to others. We felt strangers, right? We didn't feel like we could blend in properly, at least from my end, because I lived in north of Italy. There weren't many immigrants in the classrooms, right? So I felt like I had to blend in with the communities, regardless of my skin color, where I came from and everything. But I couldn't. So that conscious thought always stayed in my mind, and some other little things. When I say like childhood moments, uh, things do impact to the life that you carried on afterwards. For example, I find myself that I struggle a lot with any writing assignments. And I didn't realize why that was the issue. And I realized that, after doing some talking therapies, that, I've always been a worrier, and I've always been an overthinker. And therefore, I never had a mental clarity for me to jot down thoughts, like anything that I had to write down, for the assignment or for that writing task, because I had that brain fog in myself. So those little things, we don't realize why they happen. We think it's just because maybe we didn't understand the assignment, maybe we didn't we're just procrastinating, but there's always a reason behind why you are behaving that way, or why you have that sort of motivation, lack of motivation towards that task that you're doing right now. So you need to always find the trigger and the sign why you're feeling that way.
Mm-hmm. And I'm glad that you went to see a professional, because I think it helped you to give a little bit more clarity and understand what was triggering all this. Because like you mentioned, I also felt the same way a little bit like you when I was younger, because like you said, there were not that many immigrants, and for my generation, I was the only person that was not Italian in my classroom. So I was always very, very self-conscious. And I think all this trauma really help you to shape the person that you are, and help you also to be a bit more stronger in a sense too, because you finally are able to understand who you are. Because when you presented yourself, you said you're Italian Bengali, so I guess you finally came to accept your identity as you embracing both culture and not just one. So I'm really glad about that. So I want to ask you one last thing before we end the interview. What are some daily, I want to say daily practices that people can do to have a more peaceful life, and I want to say less stressful? Like, can you suggest something?
Definitely, I think there's so many out there.
Yeah.
But one main thing is to, prioritize yourself no matter what. Even if you are, busy with your workload, you have so many things to do with your workload. Prioritize yourself. And when I mean prioritize yourself, like take the day off to check in with yourself. Maybe go for a massage, maybe pamper yourself with some alone time, reflect yourself or go for a walk, admire the beauty, because we take this so much for granted. We don't realize the beauty of and the nature that's surrounded by us, or take a second to, admire those flowers that have overgrown in your garden and you never realized because you were rushing to get to the train station. Take those moments to reflect and admire the beauty that's around you. Some of the things that I've started implementing myself when I've got so many worrisome thoughts that are flowing in my mind and I can't keep a control of that. Journaling helped me a lot. Find a nice journaling book from the stationery shop and just jot down those thoughts. And I feel like I've become better at writing by journaling my thoughts, because I jot them down as they come into my mind without putting any filter in it. And I think I started realizing that I wish when I was doing my writing assignments, I could just write down my thoughts as they came along without trying to use big terminologies, big words for the sake of the quality of the work. And the other thing I would say, any sort of breath work really helps a lot. Mindfulness, yoga, pilates, that sort of thing really helps. Even just take 3 deep breath work, breathe this, that really helps a lot. Yeah.
Well, you share many good points, and actually some of the points that you mentioned, I actually also use them in my daily life. Like a few months ago, I learned about mindfulness techniques, like observing just outside, like the nature and everything, taking a walk, just checking in with yourself, detach yourself from like work, and just take a pause. I think there is nothing bad in that. And actually, I did I had a very productive Sunday last Sunday, and I bought a journaling book. This is my first time as
nice.
well. It's
Yeah.
called the 5 minutes like journaling
Journal?
book. Yes,
Oh, I've
exactly.
heard of that as well.
I
Yeah.
also started to write down my thoughts, and it just helps me to, just deal with anxiety and stressful life. And for me, this is relatively new, so I'm hoping like there is a positive outcome from this. But you mentioned very good points, and hopefully our audience
I'm glad.
can learn from this. Do you have anything to share before we go?
I think I'm good. I feel like people can benefit from everything that I've mentioned today, and especially on prioritizing themselves over anything else. Like work will always be there, but taking your time out to have your own time with yourself only. That's really important, I think.
Yeah, those are the best time, actually. Like I have to say, the time that you take for yourself and with yourself.
Yeah, I feel like we're so accustomed of being dependent on other people that we need someone to be there while we're going grocery shopping, or just to pick some pens and paper from a stationery shop. That it almost frightens you to go out by yourself and be amongst the crowd and just do your own chore, right? I feel like that sometimes. Like I'm so used to having people around me. Even for little things, I need to ask someone, do you want to come along? I'm going in that shop right now. Just for the company, because you feel like you feel so awkward being amongst everyone. Especially if you're living in the city, you're always traveling in public transports and you're in big malls. You feel so you don't know how to react, and so taking those little steps by going to places like even local places by yourself will start making a big change to your life.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for
Thank you
coming to my channel, and to everyone else, please make sure to subscribe, like, and leave a comment, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.